Hello, my name is Matthew Wolster, and today I'm going to be talking about Godzilla's impact on Japanese and American culture. Now, the reason I decided to do this on Godzilla is because I have all 32 movies. I've been such a huge fan of Godzilla um, since I was like 8 years old. So he's always been a big part of my life. So hopefully, I get to teach you guys a little bit more about him. So we're going to start off by talking about the origin of Godzilla. So exactly where did he come from? Where was he thought up? It all started when Tamayuki Tanaka was flying over the Pacific Ocean into Japan, and he wondered, what if there was just a giant monster about to arise from the water? And that's where Godzilla was basically born. So Godzilla's backstory um, always has to do with a nuclear disaster in Japan's past. For example, the original Godzilla was produced in 1954, just 9 years after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, the original backstory for him was that these nuclear bombs awoken Godzilla and actually caused him to then terrorize Japan. So, in 2016, there was a retelling. So, as if the 1954 version never happened, they named this Godzilla Shin Godzilla. Basically, his come up was because of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant exploding, and that awakened him. So, all of his backstories have to do with a nuclear disaster that occurred in Japan's past. So, now that we know a little bit about how he was originated, let's talk about how he's categorized. So Godzilla is a form of kaiju, which in Japan is basically just a way of saying giant monsters. There's hundreds of them, and Godzilla does make contact with quite a few throughout his 35 movies. Um, Kaiju has been thought to have originated during the Shinto religion. Uh, the Shinto believed in these godlike creatures that protected the earth. I have two of them pictured above me in the slide. So this is where they have thought to have been originated, and they have kept that with them throughout these years. So the same way that Greek mythology is still thought about and publicized today, exact same thing with the Shinto religion and kaiju. So what hooked me on Godzilla when I was younger was just how awesome he was. Giant dinosaur-like creature that shoots fire out of his mouth is awesome. But as I got older, the intrigue still stayed, not because of the monster himself, but because of how these movies were actually made. It wasn't all CGI like movies are today. It was literally a guy in a rubber suit. As you see the picture above me, it's just a guy in a rubber suit. And all he was doing was going around a model city and just knocking stuff down and using pyrotechnics to do most of the effects with little CGI needed. Um, Now, for the most part, that has changed. I know the three American released Godzillas all use CGI, no guy in a rubber suit. But the 2016 Shin Godzilla that only released in Japan did continue using the rubber suit. And that's one thing that intrigued me a lot about Godzilla is not only did they have a very old and unique style of shooting these films, but just how they got by with not much. Even Godzilla's original roar was just a violin with a leather glove and pine tar. And using that is how they created the roar, and very little computer work was needed to change the audio. I think another factor that has kept me invested into Godzilla for so long has been just how dynamic they kind of make his character. So, usually in all like superhero movies, you have the superheroes, supervillains. in monster movies, there's always a monster that attacks and the one that saves. And granted, it's the same thing in Godzilla films. However, each film is different because sometimes he is the primary attacker of the city, and other times he is their one savior because the military isn't strong enough to defeat the other kaiju. And there have been some movies where humans had to wake him up so he would protect them. So it is he's a very dynamic character outside of they just have him do so many different roles. So it's easy to be able to stay invested into these films. So now that we've gone over the origin of Godzilla and exactly how he's categorized in Japanese culture, let's talk about the importance of Godzilla. So as we know, there have been 35 films to date, one of the largest film series in the world. Um, and one of the things that I would say Godzilla made the greatest impact on was introducing American people to Japanese culture. Like I said, the first film came out in 1954. The first film had a Japanese release, and they basically had an American version as well, where they just added in a few scenes with American actors, and that was the American version. But for the most part, it was still a Japanese movie. And this was only 9 years after we ended World War II using the atomic bombs. So, though things might have not still been fresh out of war, there was probably still some tension. And for a lot of Americans, this was probably their first encounter with the Japanese culture. Everyone that watches anime today probably is only watching it because movies like Godzilla came out. Because it was one of the first movies to break that boundary from Japan to America, especially in such a unique time. And of all movies to break the borders, Godzilla was probably the best one that could have done it. Godzilla's whole backstory was on war, was on the side effects of what America did, of what the US did to Japan. And if that could make it in America, if that film could be successful, then you know you got something. So I think that this movie, especially the 1954 one, but all Godzilla movies in general are very important because it tied two countries together that probably would not have been as close before these movies came out. And that's why I think Godzilla is so important.